One thing that I could change about Calvin, well, there's probably several. I think one would be I would love to have heard more from him about his conversion. If I can throw in a couple other quick things. I wish Calvin had given a greater hearing to the Anabaptists. Now, granted, there were some radicals among the Anabaptists who advocated social unrest and who had apocalyptic visions for the end of the world that were very disruptive, but I think their extremism closed him off to what they had recovered of biblical truth concerning believers' baptism. And then lastly, I wish that he'd written a commentary on the book of Revelation.
I would say it would probably be his attitude toward the arts. And not because I have a complaint about his attitude in principle.
I wouldn't change anything because he is glorified in heaven, and thus there's nothing to change.
Another question that many people coming to the Servetus house put to us is whether Calvin was directly involved in Servetus' death, and taking into account the historical documents, we can say that, or we can argue that Calvin was indeed directly involved in his death, and we can say that he instigated his death in front of the municipal authorities. I think nowadays nobody can deny that.
Anyone who has any questions about whether or not Calvin's role in the Servetus affair was in any significant sense sinful, if I can put it that strongly, that you read any of the really first-class biographies. What becomes clear is that the decision was taken entirely out of Calvin's hands. He was more or less just in a theologically advisory position. It was put on the magistrates in Geneva. They were not going to let Calvin be the one to make the decision because, in fact, they were at that time bumping heads with him in a significant way. It was necessary with Servetus to make clear that the Protestants were willing to be as firm against heresy as the Catholics were. In fact, Servetus had already been more or less in absentia condemned by the Catholics. And so the Protestants, because they in fact could be taken to be softer on heresy, needed to take a stand.
But I think we need to keep things in context in light of what was happening at that time, and also Calvin's overall view of church discipline and the desire to restore a person to the true religion. I think I read somewhere that oftentimes when Calvin was preaching, he would just stand up and start yelling and disrupting the sermon. Probably not the best thing to help the sheep grow in their faith.
It's not as if he was out for blood and others were not in that way. And certainly there are some things in the 21st century that we do better than people in the 16th century did. And we can look back and say, gee, we wish Calvin had been different, but this was the standard operating procedure in the 16th century.
Yeah, it is important to remember, it's so foreign to our way of thinking today that, as Mark said, heresy in those days was considered a public crime. not just a private matter of opinion. It was considered to be disruptive to the fabric of society. It was viewed on the same level as robbery or murder or something, or a civil rebellion. Would it help for you to just give somebody to give a little bit of more historical background as to exactly who this guy was and what actually happened?
Servetus was a bad man.
And he was burned at the stake. Next question.
Servetus was a bad man.
And he was burned at the stake. Next question.